The meeting's now recording.
Thank you, Allison. So I'd like to call the MWPA Executive Committee meeting of April 1st to order. And Allison, would you please call the roll that we have a quorum?
Novato Fire District,
Here.
County of Marin,
Here.
City of Mill Valley,
Here.
Town of Ross,
Here.
City of San Rafael.
Here.
A quorum is present with all members.
Excellent, thanks. So this is a time, are there any requests to adjust the order of the agenda, item 3? And I am seeing none. Let's move to the public, please. So this is time for public expression. The public's welcome to address the Executive Committee on matters not on the agenda and that are within our jurisdiction. Please be advised that pursuant to government code, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. And comments may be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. And please all silence your cell phones during the meeting and mute your microphone when not reporting out. So Allison, do we have any public comment?
Looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to Mark Brown, please. It's time for your verbal report.
Good morning, everybody. Today's the joining of two of my favorite things, April Fool's Day and the opening day of baseball season. So I'm trying to raise my maturity level by not having any April Fool's jokes contained within the meeting today. I'll do my best, no promises. And I almost wore my Dodger shirt today. So, but I opted not to, try to keep it a little bit more professional. I am going to start off with a quick presentation. It's one that is prepared by our Geographical Area Coordination Center. We call it NorthOps up in Reading, and their intelligence group. And they prepare a report every year on what we can look forward to, or what we anticipate for fire season. This is typically a report that our firefighters and our chief officers will receive in May. The fact that it's already out in April probably should tell you something. So let me get that presentation. And again, as I mentioned a little bit ago, we will have 3 presentations today, but we will try to keep them as relevant, brief, and informative as possible.
Thanks, Mark.
And please let me know if you see the presentation appropriately.
Yes.
Okay, great. And so, like I said, this is the NorthOps Predictive Services, and their 2021 fire season outlook, the early analysis. Here's their prediction for, and this is key to say, their large fire potential. They're saying that March through June, we are looking at large fire potential being normal. It does not necessarily mean that there will be less or more fires. In fact, it's likely that we will have more fires early in the season, but on average, we will have about the same large fire potential. As we painfully know, we are way behind on our rain. This is the percent normal of precipitation from October 1st to February 27th. Compared to this graphic where it's January through March. So you can see that we had a very late end of 2020, or dry end of 2020, and we are not catching up with our rain in the early part of 2021. And you can see that Marin is still well below normal. So as we talked, the rainy season started late, and the snow levels have been pretty high, about 5,000 feet and above. We in the fire service like to relate our fuels to time. 1,000 hour fuels, what that means is the dead fuel, not the live fuel, but the dead and down, the larger stuff, probably 8 to 10 inches in diameter. It takes about 1,000 hours for that fuel to interact with the environment. You see the red line is the historic low. That gray line is normal, and the blue line is this year. So you can see how the 1,000 hour fuels interact with the environment. The good news is that we're nowhere near the historic low. The bad news is we're below average, and without any future precipitation, we're likely to see that trend continue down. Then our 100-hour fuels, that's the the 3 to 8 inch fuels. You see how much more reactive they are to any rains. And so this is important because these dry fuels, these larger fuels, if they are available to burn, which looks like they are going to be available to burn, that's what really starts to create that environment for large fires. Looking at this, is this the predicted rain for March, April, and May. And you can see where we are in an area that is going to be slightly less than normal precipitation amounts, while we are in higher temperatures predicted. And then our rain, and this slide really doesn't mean all that much to us because it's saying we have equal chances of normal precipitation during the summer. Well, our summer is already dry. If anything, we get 1/10 of an inch of rain. So what does that really mean to us? Not much. But our temperatures are going to be higher than normal. So we have dry fuels of all sizes. We have a below average snowpack with an early and light melt off. And then here's a key point: normal to below normal low elevation fuel crop that cures early. And that means our grasses. And for the most part, for fires to be able to go from the small stage to the big stage, we need the light fuels to be present. So if we don't have the typical annual grass crop, the chances of that actually decreases our fire risk because there isn't that light fuel crop to carry into the heavier fuels, especially during the fall. I remember when I received this report back in 2019, and we had historic fuel loading in the light fuels, and it did translate into a pretty bad fire season. So they are looking to have an early start to fire season. Close to normal summer and fall fire season below 3,000 feet. And that's because of that fuel, the light fuel crop that we're talking about, more active than normal above 3,000 feet. And that's because of the limited snowpack and the moisture that is normally able to get contained in the heavy fuels above that elevation just aren't there. So they're going to be much drier than they normally are. What we don't know yet, the Four Corners High. A Four Corners High is that persistent high system that sits high pressure system that sets off to our east and creates prolonged hot and dry spells. They don't know how many of those we're going to have. And then last year, what was the big trouble spot for us was the monsoon moisture that came up and created all the lightning. Moisture and heat equals lightning for California. So they don't know how, they're not sure how many degrading tropical storms that we may have that push moisture into California and turns into lightning. That's an unknown. And then it's always an unknown how many offshore wind events. Anecdotally, it seems like we're having more offshore events as the years have been going by. But again, this directly relates to what our grass crop looks like at the end of the year. So we don't know when the rainy season is going to start. And another big question throughout the state is how are the large burn scars of 2020 going to interact? Well, even though we burned 4 million acres in the state last year, there's still a lot of unburned vegetation, available fuels to burn. So I'm not sure how much of an impact that's going to have. What can change for this outlook? If we happen to have an average or above average April rain, well, and that's before the fine fuels have cured, that means we're going to get an increase in our grass crop and therefore could increase the fire behavior both during the fire season and at the end during the fall. If we have late rains, May or June, after the fuels have cured, it just simply delays fire season for a month or two. And by August 1st, we're back to normal. So same slide as we saw before. And so the question that means for us is, should this type of prediction alter or accelerate our path to do these predictions? I don't feel that it does. We are already on the right path. We are already moving as fast and as aggressively as we can. And that's because we already knew we were behind. The entire state of California is behind when it comes to this type of work. And knowing that you're in 5th place rather than 3rd place in a race doesn't really alter how fast you're going to be moving. But what I think what we can do is help the public be more prepared based on these predictions. And I think our communication strategy that we're going to hear about is really going to help us with that. And here are the folks up at the Reading Predictive Services. And with that, I'll stop sharing and take any questions. Bruce, if it works for you, I'll take questions on this piece and then continue with the rest of my.
Yes, please. Yeah, questions, comments from the board. Sashi, please.
Thank you, Mark. It's always good to see the data and kind of understand, what we're dealing with. And as we know, we have fire as a function of weather, topography, and fuel, and we can only control one of those things. So this at least gives us a notion of the weather side of it. But you said, should we alter our path? And no, because we're already behind. Everybody in California is already behind. How do we all know this qualitatively? But as a lifelong fire professional, how do you judge that? Like, how would you know that we are behind or not behind? Like, what would make us not be behind?
That's a great question. It's going to take years for us to finally be caught up, because like you said, we don't have control of the weather. We do have control of the fuel conditions to a certain extent, and we are 110 years behind.
Okay, and so you're measuring that based on the fact that we've prevented natural fire cycles for 110 years. Okay,
yeah.
But is there a way for us to kind of like even sort of back of the envelope kind of like see well, if we did this, we would be more on track, or what I mean? Like and I know we have like the CWPP for a very fine level of. I'm just trying to figure out like how do we communicate this?
Well, to me, the results will be the proof in the pudding, and that is when we see vegetation fires that are staying in moderate fire behavior conditions rather than transitioning into extreme fire conditions, fires that are staying on the forest floor rather than fires that are getting up in the canopies of our forests and running crown fires going into communities. I think that's what will be our indicator of success.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashi. Other board members, questions? So Julie and then Rachel.
Thank you, Mark. I was just wondering if Fire Safe Marin could use that presentation to kind of awaken the public to the urgent need to harden their homes and have more defensible space.
Absolutely. The predictive services folks make that PowerPoint presentation available to anyone who wants to. I literally just went to the website and downloaded, so I could work with Fire Safe Marin, and that is part of our communication strategy. So absolutely, we will. And as a further note, I intend to deliver this same presentation at the board meeting on the 15th.
Yeah, I'm almost wondering if each member agency should receive a similar report, because it's something that we all, I think, intuitively know, but seeing it on a PowerPoint with the data just confirms and emphasizes the need for everyone to take responsibility to safeguard their property and their own lives.
I like that suggestion, and I think the best people to deliver that is the local agencies, fire chiefs. They're personal subject matter experts, and I can reach out to the fire chiefs and share the PowerPoint with them and encourage that.
Yeah,
I'll just note that that's on our agenda for Monday is our annual fire outlook, and a slightly different version of the same data is our fire chiefs presenting that.
Of course, you're ahead of us, Sashi.
That wasn't what I was going for.
Rachel.
Thank you, Mark. And I think you're scheduled to come to San Rafael City Council second meeting in April.
Yeah, I think so.
One of the April meetings. So this report, it's predictive of sort of where we're going, but we've always talked about fire season going late into fall. So does this report get updated? Because it sort of said, was it March or February to June timeframe? And so, but we've always talked about August to November sometimes.
They typically update that forecast every 3 months. So I anticipate another forecast to be in the end of May, beginning of June, and then they'll have another one later on.
So I think in terms of delivering this message as well is putting that overlay on, just so we know the fire season extends past June. But if somebody like, oh, this year it ends in June, you know.
And what we've become painfully aware of is on average, fire seasons are 78 days longer now.
So I think we need to put a little bit more, to Julie's point, some of that messaging in.
Absolutely. Thank
Great.
you.
Other questions, comments? Mark, can you go back to the 1,000-hour, 100-hour slides, please, for a second? I need some clarification.
Let's see. Excuse my, I'm just having to get to the right spot.
Yeah, just those two slides, I was confused by kind of contrary data. There you go. Start with 1,000. So what I see here is that the current the blue line is current fuel moisture in the 1,000-hour fuels, and minimum average. The line that's following the blue line is
that gray line is the average fuel moisture.
And that's a predicted, that's a historic average, correct?
Historic average, correct.
So what we're seeing is that despite the low rainfall, it appears to be following a normal average. Is that correct?
Just slightly below that average. Yeah, it's a little bit surprising. I think it just has to do with the timing.
Yeah, I mean, so the comment is that it is the 100 and yeah. So we have the fine fuels are going to burn, but the consequences of the fire are indeed the 100 and 1,000-hour fuels. And so, you know, this would indicate to me that it's vexing that we have lower rainfall, but normally pretty much average fuel content. So it's not as dire, I guess, of a projection as one would think. Low rainfall, yes. I would expect that blue line is going to go substantially lower here as we project as the data goes into the springtime.
Yeah, my anticipation is that the blue line projection will be a steeper decline than average if we don't get more rain.
And it is the larger fuels that cause the big, hot, heavy, tornado fires. Oh, so thank you. I just want to be clear that what I saw. Thank you.
All right. Without any other questions, I'll continue with the rest of my.
Thanks,
Mark, can I just suggest that those two slides need to be modified and explained to the public before we take it to the public, because those two slides about fuel will not make any sense to anyone in the general public. Fire departments maybe, but
makes tons of sense to me.
It's
yeah, I know that.
Yeah, good.
So some other way to explain that.
Okay.
A simpler way to explain it. Yeah.
I'll see what I can do.
Thanks.
I liked what Bruce just said about the 1,000 hours is the large fuel, I think that was very simple.
This is what causes the big fires, the fire tornadoes, the unprecedented winds, things that turn over D8 cats and pickup trucks, fly them in the air. It's these big 1,000+ hour fuels that are prevalent across the landscape. You get multiple ignitions. They're all burning. They're all columns up, and they all have to, at some point, they'll join and do this. So, that's what we want to be afraid of. Fine fuels are certainly scary, but it's the big fuels that are the problem.
And that's why they don't show the 1 hour and 10 hour fuel charts,
Thank
because they dry every year in California. It doesn't matter.
Thank you.
100,000. Okay. Ops Committee and Advisory Technical Committee, they're hard at work. They have not had any public meetings of the full committee since our last meeting. The Advisory Technical Committee is looking to have a meeting sometime next week in order to work through or to discuss how to use the project proposal and notification form. A quick note on that form, Megan reviewed it, and then we shared it with Sabrina at Remy Moose Manley. So we've received their feedback to help with the content to make sure it's appropriate and comprehensive. And just a little reminder of the process, each of the individual agencies are working on their local mitigation projects, and those are the notification forms, which is identical form with just a different checkbox. And then they're also working on their submissions for core projects. And agencies within a geographical area are meeting, 3 or 4 agencies at a time on core projects that are mutually beneficial. Then after they have all their project proposals, then it will come to a formal public meeting, and all those project proposal forms will be part of that agenda packet. And all of our stakeholders, members of the public, partner entities will be able to see the proposed projects and attend the meeting where those projects are vetted, both at the advisory technical, then at the operations committee, and then finally to the board for final approval. So there's going to be ample opportunity for the public to weigh in. Citizens Oversight Committee, they're looking to learn more about the relationship between the MWPA and ecologically sound practices. I think a lot will be beneficial through this, and kind of demystify the relationship. In the end, I think it will be good. And then they will be one of the first committees to receive Brown Act training. I'm working with Megan and her office to create a Brown Act training package for all of the committees. But based on workload at committee meetings, they're the ones with the lightest load right now. So it makes sense for them to have the first Brown Act meeting. Goals and objectives. We're getting really close to our final draft on our goals, and we are roughing out some objectives for one of the goals right now. And we have a meeting on Monday with the ad hoc committee. And then we are also soliciting feedback from the advisory technical committee and the operations committee for those. For our minutes, Tony DeFrancis, our secretary, who drafts our minutes after watching the videos, she receives the input while we're talking about it, and she's been making changes, and we keep working on finding that balance where we have the right amount of content without providing too much content. So you're going to see start seeing more adjustments to that. Our application period for our request for proposals for environmental consulting firms closed yesterday at 5. We received electronically 2 proposals from 2 very reputable firms that have a proven track record. I'm excited about the 2 firms that have applied for us. And we didn't receive anything physically at Liberty Ship Way yesterday by 5, which was the deadline. So I already have a spreadsheet built to score these. I want to make a couple of adjustments, and I may request a special meeting of the executive committee to have the 2 firms give a presentation and make that as part of the vetting process. When I wrote my notes, for this, I said we should hear from Grizzly Corps soon. That's no longer accurate. We heard from Grizzly Corps yesterday, midday, and we were awarded the 2 fellows. So I was super excited about that. I have a meeting with them on Tuesday called the partner. I don't know. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's a partner meeting. And I hope to get enough details that I can include the MOU that we would have with Grizzly Corps as part of our April 15th board meeting, and to get approval from the board for the funds for 2 Grizzly Corps members instead of 1 Grizzly Corps member. They did receive more applicants to be partners than they had fellows to provide. So if the board decides to only take on 1 Grizzly Corps member, we can turn one of those seats back. But at $20,000 a person for 11 months worth of work, I think it's very beneficial for us to accept the 2 Grizzly Corps fellows. Another thing I'm excited about is that we are almost done with the background checks for our 2 planning and program managers. And I feel like I will be able to make a conditional offer of employment to one of them by the end of this week, early next week, and that will allow the next step in our background investigation. There's certain things that we cannot do until the conditional offer of employment. So I think within 3 weeks, being on the aggressive side, we may have our planning and program manager onboarded. And then finally, I had just a fortuitous opportunity to go on a little trip with Michael St. John from Southern Wind Fire on some shaded fuel break project that Southern Wind Fire did. It was not with MWPA funds. It was with a CAL FIRE grant, but it was an awesome example of what should be done and what can be done. And it was a shaded fuel break along the WUI boundary, 2 along Marin View and County View. So between the hills between Tam Valley and Tennessee Valley. And it had GGNRA property that was involved. It had private property that was involved. The GGNRA were active partners through this. They provided all the environmental compliance through NEPA. There was a small section where Michael St. John worked through the CEQA process with a notice of exemption. And he found that, you know what, it's doable. It wasn't that hard to do the notice of exemption process properly. And he and I walked much of the terrain, and he did such a great job with that. And I look forward to seeing more projects like that through our communities, both funded with MWPA funds and or other grant opportunities. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Excellent report. So board, any questions or comments on the rest of the report? I'm seeing a Mark. I have a question, something you didn't mention that we could eventually address, which is the status of the ESP product. Can you give us a quick rundown on where it is and where it's headed and what we might expect here in the short term?
Absolutely. They had the 3 work groups. I think you all know the carbon sequestration, veg management, and the DSpace type of groups, and they worked on best management practices. They merged them into one large document. Bruce and I have had an opportunity to provide feedback. We're providing feedback. They have received that feedback, and they're working hard now to be able to turn it around. And then our process that we're looking at following is that'll be one of the first asks that we have of our environmental consulting firm, is to look at the BMPs that are recommended. And some of it will need to turn into more consumable information. And then we are looking to the advisory technical committee, the operations committee, to make recommendations to the exec committee and a full board.
Okay, excellent. So I just thought just keeping everybody plugged in as to there are several parts moving together.
Yeah.
They're all tied. You know, the work that Lynn Osgood's done, ATC, the project template that's being used, the data that's been requested. You know, it's all going to come together here. So I just want to make sure. So we're what, maybe weeks away from getting something to the ATC, would you say?
I don't know if it's weeks, because I think the first step is an environmental consulting firm. And so we'll have to, once we get the environmental consulting firm on board.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much. So no other questions or comments? Let's go to the public. Allison, anyone public member like to comment?
Looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
No public comment. Thank you. So back to the committee. Any further discussion? Wonderful. Thanks, Mark. Really excellent report. Let's move on to item number 6, which is the Citizens Oversight Committee bylaws. And Mark, you're going to present the staff report on this item. And if you could please be clear as what your intentions are with this item as far as board deliberations. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be a team approach for this presentation. I'm going to start it off, and then Megan's going to follow up. And as what was mentioned in the staff report, through this process, we found that the board has no authority on approving or amending the bylaws of the COC as long as they are in alignment with our founding documents. And for the most part, we think it is well aligned, with a couple of caveats, and that is one part with the transparency and another part with the recruitment process for COC members. And our steps forward, depending on how you guys feel as far as the alignment of those last 2 components I talked about, transparency and the recruitment process, it'll likely be that the like all the other bylaws within the organization, they were just part of the consent calendar for acknowledgement, not approval. And Megan, I'll hand it off to you for the next part.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we worked through a few different versions of this with the COC, and tried to keep it in keeping with what we believe the intent of those sections of the founding documents say about the committee in terms of its responsibility, and narrowed, particularly focused on keeping the products that, or sort of the report that they develop and their oversight focused on the financial components and whether everything's in alignment with the intent of the ordinance. But as part of the ordinance, or I'm sorry, of the JPA agreement, there's a mention of them having a sort of a monitoring role in the public meetings and standing committee meetings of some of the board and the board standing committees. So we, from that, developed this sort of, the COC proposed having sort of an oversight of the transparency element, excuse me, of those committees, meaning presumably that they're involving the public and it's an open and public process as is contemplated by the Brown Act. So that would be one component to look at to see if you're in agreement with sort of prescribing that for the COC or allowing them to take that on explicitly. And then the other would be, as Mark indicated, the recruiting process, which would be sort of, they would vet candidates and make a proposal for future members of the COC. And then it would ultimately still be the board that approves that, but they would have a recommendation. And that is not explicitly spelled out in the JPA agreement, but all of these committees that will be standing committees will have to take on more explicit roles than are articulated necessarily in the founding document. So we just wanted to make sure that you feel that these two components in particular are in alignment with what those founding documents contemplated and with what you're comfortable with. And if you are, then we can put this on consent and it can move forward to the board for just acknowledgement.
And if I may expand on Megan's comments, that transparency is a foundational issue for the MWPA, and I think a lot of good could come from the COC keeping an eye on the transparency and making sure that we are in alignment with what we said that we were going to do when we were going to the voters with Measure C. And then the bylaws, or excuse me, the founding documents are very clear that the board appoints members of the COC, but it's completely silent to the recruitment process. And I think using the COC as part of the recruitment process could take a workload off the board, and we can set a system up where the board will still see every applicant, at least the applications of every applicant, and then the COC makes recommendations for the board to accept or not.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Megan. So are we ready for a question? I see Dennis, please. And Rachel?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Bruce. And I'm in agreement with what you're proposing here. But going back to the two founding documents, has it ever been determined legally or otherwise which document would supersede the other? The reason I asked the question, from my perspective, the ballot language and the one that the voters voted on seems to have more authority than the JPA, which is all just agreed upon by the 18 member agencies or however many that we have. And so I just wonder legally, if we ever get into a bind, is there one that we can fall back on as the guiding?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I agree with you that the ordinance would take precedent because it's what was supported by the voters. Exactly.
And actually, it is stated in the MWPA board bylaws that if there's any conflict between the bylaws and the JPA or ordinance, it's the ordinance and JPA supersede.
Excellent. Thanks all. Rachel, please.
Thank you. Appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and the value of the COC is so critical, especially for this large organization. The item that I'd like to reconsider or see if there's appetite to refine is the point number 6, or statement number 6. And it's section 8 of the JPA agreement, and then the proposed article 6, and it has to do with that monitoring piece. And it's the last clause of the statement. The JPA agreement is all in retrospect. So it's all of review in terms of the activity, in terms of what's happened, and where the Article 6 is current. So to address matters is a current statement where the language of the agreement is all past tense. So it's all over in retrospect, in reviewing the work that's happened. And the only reason I raise this is that we know in organizations, things can change, we can make decisions. It may not be the best decision at the moment, and it gets course corrected, say the next month or down the road. And that's part of a normal organization. And if we're going to be receiving feedback all the time, then that may not work. And it may just be a language. It may not happen in practice, but as this is being defined now and going forward, when somebody new comes in, they might interpret that differently. So I'd like to see that last clause of that statement to be in review of the COC's committees and documented as part of their reporting or some other mechanism. So, because the way I could read that is at any point in time, the COC can provide feedback. And that's not necessarily what I've heard about what was introduced.
And that Article 6 or 4.6, I think it is, has been discussed, vetted, has been a lot of work has been put into that. And I definitely shared my opinion on chasing mistakes or chasing bad ideas and making mistakes, and the benefits of chasing bad ideas and making mistakes, and that the MWPA has a process in place to correct those mistakes without the oversight. And the COC understands that and sees the benefit of that. Their goal is just to not have a retrospective report, even though, like you said, the JPA language is retrospective, says that it's to be retrospective. But the idea of correcting mistakes, maybe not too soon, and it would be much better that we spend the money of the taxpayers appropriately, rather than have a report that says, well, you shouldn't have spent it this way. So there is a fine balance. And I definitely see your point that, and Kingston Cole actually brought this up, and I see him in the audience today. He wanted to make sure, and as did other COC members, that the language was interpreted by future members of the COC in the same way that the language is being interpreted by the current members.
Fully agree that it's only that if it has to have a qualification and an explanation, then we need to revise the language. So that's my feedback on that. I don't want to get into the wordsmithing of it, but it doesn't feel that it has it's going to work on sustainably right now. And we could get in a knot around it.
Understand.
Okay, let's see. Sashi, did I see your hand up?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, and then I'll probably have some deliberative comments after we do the public comment on this. Definitely agree with Rachel's concerns there that the Citizens Oversight Committee is different from just members of the public. The members of the public, any member of the public can attend any of these public meetings, can suggest anything, can make comments. The Citizens Oversight Committee is there to make sure that we do what the voters asked us to do. So I think, Rachel, your comments are very good. My question is about the candidates for the committee. Are you guys suggesting that we would delegate that review process to the COC, or that they could make suggestions and that would be folded into our review process?
As proposed, the way I read it is that it would essentially be the former of what you said, that you would be delegating the recruitment process, and they would be a recommendation to the board.
Okay, I will have some deliberative comments after the public comment on that.
Okay, thank you. Julie, please.
Thank you. I'm just wondering on Article 4, number 7, where it's monitoring the deliberations, et cetera, to assess transparency. It seems to me like transparency is implicit throughout all of this. And I'm not really sure why the phrase at the end to assess transparency is necessary. And I also am kind of bothered by the memo that Kingston Cole sent to Bell Cole and Larry and et cetera. It didn't seem like it was monitoring. It seemed more adversarial. And it reminded me of something that I would have received on behalf of a client in heated litigation. And I'm not sure that that's the role to be adversarial. I mean, we want them to be monitoring and scrutinizing, but I think the transparency phrase to me is being misused to become adversarial. And I don't think that's anyone's goal. And I think transparency is implicit throughout. So I'm just wondering if we need to have that last phrase, the transparency.
And as mentioned, that was one of the components that Megan and I had come up with that was not quite 100% implied or addressed in the founding documents.
Well, Megan, do you have a position on that last phrase? Is that really necessary?
I think I had actually suggested we not have it there, and then they said, well, if it's implicit, why not just state it? So we ended up where we are, which is that, yeah, there was a feeling that we can just stick with, make it more explicit that their role would also be to sort of keep an eye on making sure that the discussions have a transparent nature. But we can definitely provide that feedback to them and suggest a change based on this input.
Maybe that could be somewhere in the overarching, preamble, transparency, and not necessarily tied to one of the specific actions.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Any other, Dennis, please.
I heard Mark's comment on the recruitment and how it would be handled. I read this differently. I read this as saying that the COC would make recommendations to the board, but I didn't read that as they would actually handle the recruitment. So I wanted to clarify that. But I think recruitment and advertising is the role of the MWPA. They certainly can make recommendations on who they'd like to see on their committee to the board. And that happens all the time, actually, at the Board of Supervisors. Commissions often look at the applicants and say, we recommend, or even interview the applicants and say, we recommend these applicants to the board. Sometimes we follow their direction, sometimes we don't. But I do believe that the recruitment part or the advertising part should be the role of the agency. So I just wanted to verify that because I'm not reading that into what's written, but I wanted to verify that.
Well, I guess there's a matter of interpretation where it says evaluate, select, and recommend candidates for committee membership or replacement membership to be appointed by the MWPA's board of directors. And I look at the evaluate term as that's where I translate into recruitment. Maybe it's inaccurate.
We could add some clarifying language if supervisor, if you're interested in having that clarified just before at the beginning of that sentence to specify that following MWPA's advertising and recruitment, they would then COC would then evaluate. I mean, it would sort of clarify that MWPA does the upfront work of getting the word out, and then there would be their evaluation would come next.
Can we dig into that? I have some thoughts on that too. Can we dig into this, the remedy after public comment? But yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm in agreement.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Let's move to public comment, please.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there is no public comment. Oh, I apologize. I didn't let the comments run too long. Okay, Bruce Bartel, you'll be our first public commenter.
Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. I was really disappointed by the process by which the bylaws were developed. I believe the key provision of the ballot measure that encouraged the public to fund this agency was the active oversight of a strong citizen oversight committee. Promises were made to the public that the COC would be free to decide its own processes, and oversight would be over the entire organization of the agency. Charts and diagrams showing this role, the stick figure with the magnifying glass, were presented at public meetings and to the various jurisdictions that were being asked to join the agency. I attended 1,000 public meetings where Bill Tyler and Jason Weber showed the chart of the COC relationship to the agency, and have recordings of Bill Tyler describing the role of the COC. To quote Chief Tyler at one such meeting, the Citizen Oversight Committee, which is very important, they are able to self-identify, they want to be in this role, and once formed, they will be able to write the bylaws for themselves and how they want to interact, but certainly oversight on the fiscal spending and also on the planning. The CWP was explicitly asked to support the agency, even though it had reservations about the too limited description of the COC in the JPA agreement. The CWP was asked to step back and not seek to rewrite the language because it would delay the process, and in return, the CWP was told that the COC would be able to establish its own role and processes when it came time to write its bylaws. The COC is trying to establish a new model of oversight and transparency, and that effort, I believe, has been thwarted by staff. Staff at one point actually misled the COC about the powers of the board to approve their procedures, and this to me raised bigger issues than the bylaws themselves. The issues of the COC in its role is once again under scrutiny and in danger of being limited. The COC's authority and responsibility is being questioned and second guessed, despite the fact that legal counsel has found the COC's proposed activities are in alignment with the JPA agreement and the Measure C tax ordinance, and that the board does not have the responsibility or authority to approve the bylaws of the COC. The transparency that was discussed is key to a successful agency. The COC must be free to raise issues of transparency in the operation of the agency. It is implicit in its very name of the committee, oversight. The COC's ability to seek the committees and their decision makers in real time is key to preventing issues later. The optics of seeing a new agency that is dedicated to transparency, fighting for less oversight and less transparency, are extremely ugly. I do not understand why the staff of this agency is so reluctant to let the COC fulfill its public responsibilities, and thank you for the opportunity to address this committee.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks so much.
Next-
Allison, other comments, please.
Our next public comment will come from Larry Minikis.
Welcome, Larry.
Good morning. I appreciate Bruce's comments, and he's been very involved in this. I haven't felt anywhere along the lines here that there's been any attempt to mislead us, however, and that's the one place I cannot agree with Bruce. I'm sorry he feels that way. I really do. My concern, and I'm looking at this way past when I'm off this committee, is that the COC's purpose is oversight. However, we do not have members on this committee, or in the future, I believe, that will be qualified to oversee the actual planning and implementation by the operations committee and the ATC. I think this is, and I've said this in our meetings, this is the purpose of the board of directors, to the oversight over these other committees. And if you start giving power to citizens to say, well, no, you shouldn't do this project or you shouldn't do that project, without their, how should I say this, without the expertise to really make qualified decisions, could turn out to be very dangerous in the future. I believe we want to follow that line where you are just balanced, where the COC is doing its job, its oversight, and we're making sure that the funds are spent as the funds were meant to be spent. And that's all I really need to say here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Larry. Thanks very much. Allison, any other public comment?
I'm moving for any further raised hands from our audience members. And there's no further public comment.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm sorry, I've got to. Let's move to this further discussion. And Sashi, please.
Thank you. I think there were several of the other members of the committee who had the same kind of thoughts, but well, first of all, I want to appreciate the couple of members of the COC that called in and gave their thoughts. And I agree with Larry that there's a distinction between the board and the COC, and both have an important role. I do not think it's a good idea to have the COC evaluate their own applications. I think that there should be a way for the COC membership to evolve over time. And if you allow, whatever faction is currently sort of in the lead to control the membership there, then you don't allow for that, sort of ebb and flow to happen. I think that, it's our responsibility as a board to choose the members. And I think that the COC should definitely give some input on that, just as any member of the public could. But, I think that we should definitely consider it, but I would not put the process through them. So that evaluate piece, I think I would just interpret that to mean, like we'll have the applications in the board packet and they can evaluate them and they can give us their feedback and we can give them enough time to do that. So I just wanted to have that be part of, Dennis had suggested something and Megan, you were suggesting some changes and I just wanted to kind of tie that in. And there was noted that the board doesn't have the authority to approve the bylaws of the COC, which is totally right. But if something in the bylaws oversteps their authority, then of course that isn't gonna stand. But I think my other sort of general comment is this is all very new. There's trust hasn't been established between all these different entities, and I think we all just kind of have to have some patience with that. Hopefully, the COC, the board, all the different committees, we're all developing relationships. None of us have even seen each other in person, so I think that we should all try to temper, some of the things, as Larry mentioned, we would like the bylaws to stand well beyond those of us who are on the board now and those of us who are on the COC now. So those are my comments. I would be very much not in favor of handing off the first vetting of the applications to them. I think that's a board responsibility.
Thank you, Sashi. Other board members' comments, please. Dennis.
Bruce, I would just second what Sashi just said. And from the perspective of transparency, it's also, I think, something that should be advertised widely and invited widely to join and submit those applications. And so I think it's even more important from that perspective, that from a transparency point of view, we don't want this to look like it's inside baseball sort of move, because the committee who they're going to be appointed to are actually too involved in making the selection. And so I think from the MPWA's point of view, advertising that the positions are available and controlling the applications is the way to go. And then to share those applications with the COC and ask for them to make recommendations to the board when we have our final deliberation would be appropriate.
Thank you, Dennis. Julie.
I think the COC could help with the identification and recruitment of people concurrently with the board, because they, many of them have various areas of expertise. So I don't think we want to foreclose them from helping recruit, but we don't want them to be the exclusive group doing that work. It could be concurrent.
Okay, thank you. Rachel.
I also agree with the comments in terms of the ongoing management and recruitment process for the COC. Those boards tend to change quite frequently. And it is nice to be able to have that opportunity, and we will probably have to get into a fairly standardized process and procedure of recruitment. And so I think if we lay that out early, and it will be put into practice. And so it is open to everyone to be able to participate from a COC perspective. In terms of the overall where we're at, it doesn't feel like it's quite ready to come to the board in a consent. And I'd like to suggest that maybe we comes back again with some additional modifications based on where we've talked about today. And I don't know if there's any other specific areas, but I'm curious, how do we move forward at this point?
Thank you, Rachel. Excellent questions. Mark, Megan, do you want to respond to that?
My recommendation would be that we could agendize for the COC's next meeting, these comments and deliberations of this meeting, and work with them on those particular items, specifically the areas where it's clear that there is no implicit direction in the founding documents, and that would be the transparency piece and the selection of the COC members.
It would also, I think, be helpful. I know we've heard Rachel's comment on the concerns about sort of the real-time feedback going into the process. But if we could get sort of consensus from the committee to understand whether that's at least the majority of your concerns, or if what sort of to give us some idea of what to focus on most explicitly, because I've heard different concerns from different individuals.
So Megan, you're asking for, again, Mark, can you please paraphrase that?
As far as Megan's comments, I think she's asking for something of a straw vote as far as a consensus for 4.6, and that is the piece where it would be more active in time addressing of issues versus retrospective. Does that capture it?
Yes, I just
Can
wanted
I
to
clarify? Yeah, can I ask Megan a clarifying question?
Yes,
Yeah.
please, Tashi.
So I actually, as it stands right now, I would kind of be okay with leaving everything as it stands right now and having it go forward if Megan feels like those two things are not binding in a way that bothers, those of us here. I think, because I think the comment about assessing transparency, is a little, there's a little bit of a tone there, but I don't see that there's anything binding there that would be a problem. And then the same thing with the evaluate. There's an interpretation there that we can decide how we want to, and we can decide how we want to handle our process. But does leaving that language in there bind us to anything? So my question to Megan is that, like, if we left those things in, if we leave it all as it is does this bind us to anything?
No, I mean, I think that's a great point actually that you raise, which is that this is for their internal operations of sort of where they see their role and how they're going to perform that role. And so if they, in performance of that role, if it becomes in practice an issue for the board and there's some concern about overstepping, then we can address it at that phase. But I think how it's written, the interpretation, we don't need to be so explicit with the interpretation of every provision at this stage. And if it becomes an issue, then we can raise it at the time. That's another definite approach to that.
Well, given that, I would kind of be inclined to move forward. I think it would be sort of a gesture of goodwill. You guys did your thing. Their bylaws are kind of short. And we've sort of, if we make it clear in the staff report, this is how we currently interpret, the lines there. You guys have this in there, but this is how we're going to go. That it wouldn't bother me to just move forward. I don't know how everybody else feels. And
for what it's worth, I'm personally comfortable with where we landed with the bylaws. I feel that it is a great starting point. And it, especially when it comes to the recruitment piece, I think, maybe my incorrect definition of evaluating equaling recruitment. I have a feeling that COC will be fully on board with MWPA staff working with the board to perform the recruitment, solicitation, bringing people on board. And then as one of the board members, I think that may have been Julie or Sashi that mentioned it'd be Julie, it was a collaborative approach between the board of directors and the COC through that evaluation process.
Thank you, Mark. Julie, please.
So just a question, were we to leave this as it is and things, go sideways, what's our remedy? How do we address kind of reeling things back in? If necessary, hypothetical question only.
Right. Well, I think it would be fairly straightforward, and that the board would bring that to the attention to Mark, or to some sort of process would be started where we would communicate those concerns to the COC, and then ask that the COC either change their practices, or if it's necessary, change the bylaws. Because really they're providing, the board is in charge, I don't know if in charge is too strong a word, but is the decision maker ultimately for everything, and interpreting everything for MWPA's both founding documents and in practice, in terms of what MWPA gets done, whose voices they hear, how they hear them, that type of thing. And so if it becomes an issue, then the board could raise that issue, and we could then work with the COC to address it. So I think that that's true of any of the standing committees. If you feel like there are things that go off the rails a bit, then there's an opportunity to work with them to get them back on the rails.
Thank you, Julie. Rachel, question? Yes, comment? Discussion?
More of a comment. No, I do appreciate the proposal to move forward and the need to want to do that. It does make me, just in my project management perspective and mind around this, I always rely on what's in writing. And when there's pieces of documents that are so potentially up for interpretation with this group, absolutely, we can move forward and it'd be fine. But if you bring in a new players on the board, new players, it will raise a lot. It could potentially, as Julie said, could raise questions. And then we spend a lot of time operationally focusing on that. And I'm wondering if the work we're doing the work right now, if we should think of it from a perspective of, let's plan for the future, and not with a lot of asterisks and it will help, it's all these footnotes and in discussion, that I think it's a concern when we try to manage that way. So, we're putting in all the hard work right now. If you look at a new composition of a new COC, look at a composition of a new board, you're asking them to then take on that work again. So I just want to make sure we weigh that out. It's hard. I think it's hard to get through this always, but it will help, I think, in the future. And I think that's one of our real responsibilities, is laying out the path for the future.
Thank you, Rachel. Julie, please.
Yeah, Rachel, I agree with that statement. I think we have an opportunity to be more clear right now. And why wouldn't we take advantage of that? It doesn't mean that we are distrusting the existing COC or the process. It just means we want to have more clarity going forward. And we want to avoid, we don't want to have a discussion with later at the board level where, in some of our minds, the COC has gone off the rails and we have to have this discussion again. We want everything operating seamlessly going forward. So I think, to the extent we can make things more clear now, we should take advantage of that.
Thank you, Julie. Sashi, please.
I agree with what Rachel and Julie just said in terms of the concerns, but my understanding, Megan, please clarify, is we don't get to tell them what's in their bylaws. So what we could, if we don't care for what's in there, we can do what Mark suggested and say, okay, we're going to kick it back to them and suggest that they make those changes. But we could also just continue to do that for a while, and then, and create more tensions between the two groups. So the reason I'd suggest moving forward is because, given what Megan said, nothing that is in there, the potential for off the rails is okay. So they let's say some of the members of the COC decide they're going to kind of take on the board's role and kind of second guess the board and on staff's decisions in a more real-time basis. They can do that as members of the public if they want to, so that means that they could do that as the COC as well. The only job that we're giving them is that, as Rachel referred to, the retroactive job of go look at that last year and see whether we fulfilled our obligation to the taxpayers. And as long as they're doing that, anything else is kind of, it's going to be, we're limited in what we can restrict them from doing because they're members of the public and they can do what any members of the public can do. So I think in terms of trying to develop this trust and this relationship with them, and because we don't have jurisdiction over their bylaws, I'd be inclined to say, these are the bylaws. You know what your limitations are. We've made that clear through our legal counsel, and you know what your responsibilities are. And then we continue to nurture the relationship going forward. That would be my suggestion. But we certainly could decide to kick it back to them. But I think those are the two options: is go forward as is, or to kick it back to them and hope that they make the changes that we would like to see. Is that correct, Megan? Because we can't compel them to make any changes.
Right. There's no approval process for the bylaws, so that if there's no contradiction between what's envisioned by the founding documents and what's in the bylaws, then the board's role is fairly limited.
Dennis, please.
Yeah, thank you for the discussion. I don't think we'd be having this discussion if the bylaws reflected what the guiding principles said that the COC could be. But there are 2 or 3 items here that sort of go beyond that. And I'm concerned that if we move this forward, that's an acknowledgement of some sort that they now can include those in their bylaws and give them the authority in the future that we've allowed that to happen. So I think we need to just think about it a little more. So I'm more in favor of just delaying this and maybe having another discussion about it. And then I throw out there, would it be possible for them to develop their bylaws based on what their authority is, and then sort of have a side procedural agreement to these other few things separate from the bylaws? And is that an option?
Thanks, Dennis.
That's an interesting question, and they do have a rules and policies ad hoc subcommittee that'll be working on similar language to that. Definitely could bring it forward to them. Bruce, you've been quiet through all this.
I have, and I purposely, to make sure that everyone speaks their mind fully, and that we vet any comments or questions. I'm okay with these bylaws as they currently sit. I think we need to move forward. I think in good faith. Mark, you worked diligently with the COC. You've gone through every word. Megan, if Megan feels that this indeed is consistent, and it's her interpretation of that, we can always revisit. I guess from my perspective, the point is, the way this was written is that in arrears, they would take a look at what we've done, which makes absolutely, I understand that there must be a public record of actual work that has been done, what tracks we have laid down. But in effect, I think that this is designed to facilitate communication and early problem identification and deliberation with the board at the executive committee level, and to bring before we make a mistake. They can, and they're saying that they would speak as a committee, not 9 independent soldiers here, but they would speak as a committee in monitoring all of our deliberations, and come to us as a committee after they deliberate, come to us on public record and raise issues. And I see no downside to that. The decisions are then, the deliberations are then at the executive committee, and then if there are problems, we take them to the full board for policy decisions. And if it's good, fine. If it's not, we we move the issue back to Mark to resolve through ops or ATC. I understand concerns about, maybe we're getting off on the wrong foot. I agree that the tonal, the question about the letter that came in, it did not strike a kind interactive tone. But what I think what's proposed here is that they stand up, they participate, they listen, they deliberate, they come to the executive committee, and with recommendations. They're not making decisions for us at all. I think we need to give stuff a try. One piece of advice that I got from someone very prominent is in essence, try stuff. It's not gonna be perfect. And if it's not perfect, try it and say, look, we're gonna approve this and we're gonna revisit it in a year or 6 months and give it a try. I don't want to grind through every word with the COC. I think we need to establish trust, faith, good intent, develop a relationship. So I am okay if Megan says that this is okay to move forward. I'm okay with it, and I know that there are a lot of questions, but we're not perfecting things here. This is not a 50 face perfectly cut diamond. I'm for following Megan and Mark's Megan's legal interpretation. And if it says it's okay, I'd say let's approve it, move it on, and contingent upon, let's revisit it next year.
Well, and we really did not build, since the board does not have the approval aspect of the bylaws, we did not build into today's agenda an opportunity for the executive committee to vote on this. It was just more for feedback. And I think a consensus route of Bruce's suggestion would be a way to go. Would you agree, Megan?
Yes, that's a great approach.
I apologize. I didn't mean approve. What I mean is, that this is presented to us. We've deliberated, we've discussed. And if Megan interprets it to be, legally compliant, that it move. What would be the next step? It would be
put to the board just for review or acknowledgement. One option is that we could do that with a caveat, which would be kind of in line with what you were just saying, Bruce, which is to set this for a year out to sort of review how the COC, how it's gone for the year under its current practices and bylaws, and if there are issues a year out to visit it then. That was what I heard you say. So we could make that part of what you're what we would put forward on the at the board level for their consideration too.
So I think the question mark really goes to back to executive committee. I understand there are some concerns. Do we want to slow this down? Do we want to? Well, we have. We can advance it to the full board or take no action. I suppose those are our options right now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Hi, Rachel. Yes.
So I'm okay with the recommendation to review it in a year. I do think to say that it's all within legal direction, but it's not binding is, I don't know if that's the right way to go into something. I mean, it's to say that none of these statements are not binding means that could be interpreted that it doesn't matter. And I don't know if that's really if we're saying we're going to put the right foot forward, it seems so. Yes, I mean, I've made my statement on it, and I am concerned. I wish we could work collaboratively with the group to see if there's an appetite to refine any of these statements based on this feedback that we've provided. And I understand we don't vote on it. It just comes to the board, and I get it, but it feels like it's not really the right foot forward on either side. To say, here's your document, but it's not binding, and here's our statements, but So that doesn't seem like we're still going in the right direction.
I don't know that it's not binding. I think, sorry if I can jump in. It's just, it's just, I think that if there were two objections. One is the ensuring transparency thing, and one was evaluating, right? Like, I don't know if there was another one, but ensuring transparency, there's nothing, that's sort of, there's, I don't know, that just, there isn't anything binding about that. And then evaluate is subject to interpretation. So that's, is there something specific that you're worried is gonna, about the language? I don't know, maybe we should just get to what the specific concerns are. And if I'm not interpreting those, I want to understand what it is you're concerned about.
Good questions.
No, good question. And I think the question is, if we're all interpreting it a little bit differently, it means that there's an opportunity to refine the language. And so that in of itself is indicative that we need to tighten up the language so that anyone can read this and have the same understanding. Bruce, you mentioned that the committees will come back and present formally. I read, Article 4.6, that it's not necessarily a committee, a person could speak. So again, there's a opportunity for interpretation there. So I think those are anywhere we have that opportunity for interpretation is an opportunity to tighten up the language. And it may be still presenting the same information, but let's make sure. And we just tighten it up.
And I think that process that we're talking about as far as how the full committee gives feedback to the board could be explored and defined in the policies and procedures that the COC is working on. Then, so the bylaws creates the framework and the overall direction, whereas the policies and procedures dictate the process.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Could you clarify? I thought I heard this would be on the consent calendar, but then I heard we won't be voting on it. So that means it's informational. So which is it?
It would be on the consent calendar as acknowledged.
Does that sound right, Megan, that you put it to a vote and then action and it's acknowledged? I mean,
That's how we've been handling the bylaws for all of the committees so far, is just they've developed their own and sort of acknowledging that's in place since there isn't a formal approval required. So we would just be consistent with what the practice has been so far. Is that useful?
yeah, thank you. And I just follow up that I agree with Rachel. We've had different interpretations just within this group today. So that tells me that the language needs to be clearer or cleared up, because that means that at the board meeting, you're going to have similar questions, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Dennis. Julie, please.
Mark, since you've been working so closely with the COC, and these changes this conversation and the suggested clarifications are not really monumental. Do you think they would have an appetite based on what we've been discussing to go back and clarify, modify those two areas?
For sure, in the aspect of selecting members, the transparency, I don't think I haven't heard a lot of concern from the executive committee as far as the transparency, other than, well, of course, we're being transparent. But I've been kind of picking up from the executive committee, there's not a lot of harm in that aspect as long as the tone is appropriate. It's 4.6 and the idea of retrospective versus forward leaning. And the COC will, I believe, be open to providing better definition or clarity as long as they have a forward leaning aspect that they can help catch problems before they're fully funded.
Thank you. And Rachel, I just want to go back to the comment about the ability of Citizen Oversight Committee to comment. They can comment as citizens. They cannot comment. If you look at Article 5, the first bullet is no member of the committee shall act as official spokesperson of the committee unless officially authorized by the committee. I mean, that indicate, and maybe that language needs to be clarified also, but in essence, They will be acting as a committee. Any citizen can ask any question anytime. So, as far as they would be interacting, I believe, as in individual committee deliberations. They would listen, but they would be speaking as a member of the public. That's my interpretation. Megan, can you maybe help us
Yep, that was exactly what it was, that they have the opportunity to speak as members of the public, whether it's in their bylaws or not. So there was the language in the original JPA agreement about monitoring the board and standing committee meetings. And so this was just basically an extension of that, but acknowledging that they could speak because they could speak as members of the public, unless there is a designated sort of section on one of the agendas that specifies that there would be reporting out by the COC specifically, but otherwise they would just be doing any comments during public time.
And I appreciate that. And I think maybe just as council members, we're all subject to even a like on a Facebook now. We're required, we can't do that. So we always are council members, regardless, we're also members of the public. So I just think, so like the comments that were read today, maybe it needs, and this is maybe in the process and procedure, I'm a member of the COC, but I am speaking as a member of the public. It needs to be prefaced so the community understands, are you speaking on the behalf of the COC as a member of the COC, or you speak on behalf as a member of the public? It's unclear to me, and I also don't know all the names of the people who are members of the COC right off the top right now. And so I think it's really important to make sure that clarification is there. Or I am reading this on behalf of the COC.
Thank you, Rachel. Excellent, excellent. I'm hearing a consensus here that Mark and Megan have a little work to do. Specific issues have been identified, some clarification in the language, and then bringing this back next month. Is that where we are?
And
Mark, do you want to summarize for us, please? You're going to, specific issues were identified.
right, and so specifically, it seems to be that it's in 4.6, 0.7, and 0.8 to perhaps work on that language to clarify it, make it less open to interpretation, as long as the COC is good with the overall intent that they're trying to achieve. So that's what I'm hearing from this conversation. To not have it part of the 415 board meeting, since the next COC meeting is following that meeting. And I do have a question bordering on a suggestion, and that has to do with their policies and procedures that they're working on. If the policies and procedures provides that greater detail, and we bring the bylaws and the policy procedures together as a joint package, perhaps that provides the clarity you're looking for.
Thank you. And that was Dennis's suggestion. Thank you, Dennis. Okay. Wow. Well, we're well into this, into our meeting today. I think we're ready to mark your clear, Megan, to move on. And thanks everybody for this discussion. Thanks for everyone for all of your wonderful, analysis and recommendations. So let's move on then to item number 7, which is the MWPA's the draft communication strategy. Mark, you are on yet once again, and welcome, Pam.
And I think I introduced her already, but this is Pam Kuhn. She's been working with us closely. The communication strategy ad hoc subcommittee includes Catherine Donahue, Gabe Paulson, Steve Berto, Paul Jeske, and it's been supported by myself, Pam, and Ross Goering. They both have been supporting Fire Safe Marin with their communications, and it's been phenomenal. And Pam has been putting a lot of hours, and I'm going to pass it off to Pam to have a little presentation to outline our communication strategy, draft communication strategy.
Hi, thank you. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. I sometimes have ear pod issues with my son's iPad in the other room. Okay. Just by way of introduction, I've worked in-house doing communications and public outreach for Yosemite National Park, Sonoma County Water Agency, and Marin County Parks. So And then I am now a contractor and have been doing some work with Fire Safe Marin and actually a little bit with City of San Rafael recently. So with that, I will get right in. So the first thing that we spent a little time talking about is, we wanted to have a core identity. What's the clear, concise core message or idea of Fire Safe Marin? And this would help engage the audience. It would kind of anchor the brand. It's why you exist. And it kind of helps separate it. One of the discussions we've had is some of the public confusion around public and agency confusion around like, what's the difference between Fire Safe Marin and MWPA? So we want some kind of core message or idea that helps really explain who MWPA is. We took a look at the mission statement and basically we've just taken that core idea straight from the mission statement, which is leading the evolution to a fire adapted marin. The idea of this too is, I'm thinking about residents in particular. Residents everyone probably has thought, do I need to move to the East Coast? Am I going to be safe in my house? Can I stay here? And what MWPA does is kind of offer this idea that if you adapt, we can become much more safe. We are going to adapt in place and we can stay here. And I say that as someone who is having a really hard time, cutting down my own mature vegetation surrounding my house. What's good, so if you feel like you're part of something bigger and you're part of creating a fire adapted marin, you might be more likely to take those kind of actions. From there, we kind of looked at what are the different audiences and what do those different audiences need to know. And this, you've probably seen the Fire Adapted Network website, and this kind of comes from that idea of the Fire Adapted Network is going to have all of these different audiences doing their own parts to fulfill the mission and vision. And then we went into I'm doing this as a very, high overview. We have a plan that is a lot more wordy, but
Pam, can I interrupt here real quick?
Sure.
And it's my fault for not building this preface in before you stepped in. I do want to point out that the goals that are in this document are a couple revisions old goals. We just use them in this document as an example how the goals will relate to the communication strategy. But it is important to point out that we've had a couple revisions since these, but Pam had to have something to work from for the draft strategy. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. So from we looked at the audiences, we kind of came up with what this core identity should be based straight from the vision and mission. And now we have goals, and the goals are also coming from the vision. And, I didn't write out all the draft goals, but the draft goals are, kind of coming from the Measure C language and all of the things you want to accomplish. And so from there, we have some communication goals. What do we think the communication should accomplish? And we have some goals that we think are common to all audiences. We're hoping that all residents and all member agencies are inspired and empowered to do their part to create a fire adapted Marin County. They should be aware of MWPA and understand how it relates to the greater Marin fire community. And if we're successful in achieving our mission and vision, they would trust MWPA and know they're getting a good return on investment. And then within that, we also want to stay true to some core values that would incorporate, a primary focus on wildfire prevention, transparency and timely access to information, driven by science. And as that relates to communications, that's probably developing some metrics to make sure that the communications are in support of, that they're actually working so that we can modify the strategy if we need to, and that they're user friendly. So engaging, clear, concise, accessible, visually compatible with partner material. And I guess I'll keep moving on, but if anybody needs to break in, I mean, Mark, if you feel like I'm missing anything. And I didn't want to go through every goal by every audience, but I'm just going to give you two examples of how we broke these goals down by audience. So you have internal partners to MWPA, those 17 jurisdictions. And they're going to need communication from MWPA about the projects and programs. And they're also going to be a crucial part of communication to the public with the defensible space evaluations and, chipper days, fire safe Marin with their public education. So kind of stemming from that, goal 1 is that MWPA staff will effectively communicate with member agencies so that member agencies will understand. One of the objections, member agencies will be able to understand and explain how MWPA relates to their own mission and the greater Marin fire community, including the role of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And some of that has come out of just communications with even the ad hoc team, and just really trying to tease out what's the difference between Fire Safe Marin, how do the local jurisdictions work, and just making sure that at least within the member agencies, we're all on the same page of how that works and how we're all working together. And then another example is for Marin residents. We want the communications from MWPA to inspire and empower residents to do their part to create a fire adapted Marin County. And an objective would be that they've received inspiring, empowering, and clear information regarding how to harden their home, create defensible space, receive alerts and warnings, and safely evacuate a wildfire. So again, it's not kind of communication for communication's sake. It's coming directly from the goals, mission, and vision. And then from that, we've created a big list of things we think we need to get done right off the bat, just to make sure we're meeting our mission and vision. And the first deliverables that we're proposing for spring and summer are here on this page. And the first one being to develop a website and continue the ongoing management that's happening, where Mark is, he's updating everything in a timely manner on all the agendas and meeting minutes. But we also want to have a good space for explaining the programs, projects, funding, timelines, all of those things that are actually happening on the ground. And potentially maybe there's like a fillable form there for people to apply for local funding, creating a really a good hub for talking about MWPA. There's some things that are already ongoing, like the ongoing member and partner meetings, which help to really build trust, cross-pollinate ideas, and provide for a lot of two-way communication. We're going to work on an earned media strategy that would be looking for, what are the topics that we think would work for print, radio, and TV coverage, and earned media being free media, that we put out press releases, and that they're things that, the Marin IJ or the Point Reyes Light that they want to pick up and develop for stories. We think we need some kind of style guide. We don't know. This is yet to be determined what it is, but something that to make sure that all member and partner agencies are consistently communicating about MWPA, and maybe, it's a fire funds at work kind of idea, or, we'll flesh that out. We have talked about the need for an organizational chart. It's a small project, but just to explain how MWPA relates to the different partner agencies. And then Mark already has on deck two sets of public meetings, one in spring that's kind of reporting on work accomplished to date, and one in the late summer that's by geographic area to help the public understand what projects are going to be occurring in their area. Because the fiscal year ends on June 30th, we plugged in an annual report that would probably be, coming out in the end of summer. Wildfire Prevention Week, we think we should amplify the messages coming out from Marin County and CAL FIRE. And then this idea has come up that if we put in place in the beginning a way to manage data around the actual fire prevention things happening in the field and the number of times that MWPA has contacted a person, we can use that to help report data, assess needs, and plan campaigns. And then in fall and winter, we would basically be building on all of the things we did in the spring and summer. So once we have the style guide connected, once we've kind of outlined a bunch of these different strategies and we've got a website, we would begin the rollout. So we would look at what's the social media strategy. I mean, we could still be posting on social media now, but do we want to include anything like Nextdoor, which is very popular and useful in Marin County, some goals and metrics, and kind of discuss what's a realistic level of moderating, because once you've got Facebook and things like that going, you get comments, you get questions, and figuring out how to do that given lack of an in-house staff to help put those tasks, to help do those tasks. We would begin the partner rollout. So, giving the style guide, talking points, a whole package to the partner agencies. So everybody's kind of saying the same thing. Content development, so if there are things like the e-newsletters that partners are putting out, we've got, maybe we look at it as a monthly theme, and MWPA always has a little update or progress report in a bunch of different places. And the content might live on the website, but we would, want to look at pushing that out. An outreach strategy, which would be looking at, more, what are the ways we think we want to strategically look at two-way communication with the public and with various committees, develop metrics for success, identify if we're missing any audiences, and identify if and when we might want to sort of proactively use risk communication templates. And risk communication templates are some things that government organizations have been using. The EPA uses these templates where, when there are situations of high stress, controversy, or concern, there are a number of ways that you can communicate with the public where the message is received better, I guess. So we might want to, proactively determine if MWPA needs to do that. And that's basically where we are. And I will stop talking and let you, see if there's any questions.
And before, if you don't mind, if Emily, just add one statement before we get to questions. That is, the phase 1 and phase 2 are very aggressive with a lot of content items. However, and the good news is it won't be me or just MWPA staff that's implementing that. We would be working with Pam and Ross in order to implement this. So we do have some depth to make sure that we can get to those. But I do want to be cautious of overcommitting and underperforming.
I would say too that some of it's already happening. I mean, Mark's already continuing to have the website managed. There's already these member and partner meetings. He's already got these public meetings on deck. So not all of it. Some of it might be more in the spring and summer. We're laying down all the groundwork for a new website. We're laying down the groundwork for the information management, but maybe it doesn't actually get complete until fall or so.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Rachel, please.
Thank you for laying all this out. Really appreciate it. Love working with Ross and you guys on this work. I have a couple of comments or questions. I'm just going to chime in because I was going to say the same thing as Mark. I feel like there's a lot here. And maybe just narrow it down for the first 3 and then maybe the next 3 and the next 3, somehow to break it down in terms of priorities. Because if we're really successful and now going into summer, I think the risk management probably needs to be moved up. The first time there's a fire in California, all of a sudden we're going to have a reawareness of what's happening and concern. And I think we need to plan in advance for that this season on how we're going to respond and what are we going to do. And so I think that risk management piece should probably be moved forward at some point. When I go out and I'm talking to community members, I always throw in MWPA and ask people, do you know what I'm talking about? Residents do not get it. They really don't understand. So I appreciate all the opportunities to tie in. And then I say fire safe Marin, and they're like, I don't know. They know their fire department. They know the fire department. And so because the poor fire department gets all the questions about MWPA and fire safe and everything else. So I think we really need to understand the community's perspective, which now going back to my first question is I'd like to add on and some surveys or focus groups. I think we really need to get some more grassroots understanding what the community understands these organizations to be. and who does what. And maybe we need to see, who are we positioning in front to the community and really taking it from a community residents perspective and being in their shoes of what they understand and what these roles are. And maybe MWPA's role is to position fire safe Marin, and that's just hypothetical. Maybe MWPA's role is to position the fire departments and everything else. And some communities in Marin are not fire safe or firewise. Many are not firewise.
Most.
So they're not gravitating that information. And the last comment and question is, we get so much information. I think there's just so much information overload. I think we need to do better. I think there's an opportunity to do better on streamlining the communication and being very, very specific to where, from the residents' perspective, what do they need to understand in our community? So those are sort of my comments and questions around those pieces. But in general, I'd love it all done tomorrow. So
I'm taking notes too. If I'm looking down and just taking notes.
it's great. I love it. And I'm just trying to be very realistic on working on a number of these types of projects, how much you're really able to do with resources and availability.
Would you, well, and I don't know, I don't know how this meeting is exactly structured, but could I ask, so would you say then your top 3 priorities would be the risk management, surveys and focus groups on like the website, or how would you look at, what, do you have any opinions on that?
You know, I have opinions, but I mean, I'd like to move it off to have it, the committee who's working on this work, go around and think about that with some of those figures. And I'm happy to have, other conversations or be part of the committee or however else, but I would just let the committee try to work through that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Excellent comments. Julie, please.
I have a bunch of little edits that I won't belabor the group with, but I was wondering, on the first page, Mark, of your staff report, you say that this will stay within the public outreach budget. I just wondered what that was.
That was the budget that we have allocated to Fire Safe Marin for public outreach. And we have the budget space in there to accomplish the goals that have been outlined in this strategy in that.
Okay. Do you know off the top of your head about how much that is?
It was originally 540,000, if I remember right, and we had over 300,000 available.
But we're not spending 300,000 on a communication strategy.
No,
Okay.
absolutely not.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Other board members, questions or comments? I too have a bunch of minor edits. I really appreciate Rachel's comments regarding, prioritization and trust that'll be pursued. I'm particularly frustrated by conversations, the results of conversations I've had with fire chiefs about their frustrations that the public is unresponsive to the door knock and the prescriptions, the recommendations. And I'm particularly from communication, I think one of our number one issues is, how do we connect? How do we compel action? That's what I would like us to focus on. So however you weave that in, Pam and Mark, because we can flap our jaws all day and be on all kinds of media, but unless it affects a change. So that's one item, that is it, number one. How do we affect, compel action? Secondly, there's a partnership relationship here, of course, between MWPA and the work that you all will be doing. But to me, it's critical that we get our metrics down sooner rather than later. And what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And so, Mark, we've got the vision, mission, goals, and objectives, and we've talked about metrics and monitoring. We have to stand that up, because that then becomes the actions that we invest in. I place that also with, compelling action. Well, action on what? What are the metrics? To me, those are the priorities. anyway, those are my two comments. And I think this is a fabulous package. I think it's very professionally done. I would ask you to do an acronym search and make sure that you define your acronyms before laying them out. And other than that, no, I think this is a wonderful start, but let's move strategically and meter our communication to affect a change. It's not about MWP. It's not about tooting our horn. It's about affecting a change. So I just want to make sure that we're focusing on informing the public on what needs to be done, by who, when, what investments we're making, and what difference we're making with the monitoring that we're doing, and then communicating that out. So thanks, Pam. Really, really great package. I was impressed. I read this early this morning. Very, very impressive. But let's focus.
Right. And I will say too, Paul, on the communication committee, when he read it, he was like, it needs to be more concise. So point taken on that. All right.
Other
Well,
board
thank you very much.
questions, comments? No. Thanks. Well, let's move to the public. Public comments on this, please, Allison.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Thanks, Allison. Then committee, any further discussion? And Mark, do you want to summarize where we're headed with this then?
This summarization is, and it got brought up a couple times, both in this agenda item and previous ones, that the voice that the public really needs to hear from is from their local fire departments. That's their trusted people. That's the people they know. And MWPA is not trying to supplant that message, trying to support and augment that message. And that's part of the strategy, is how we're going to accomplish that. And with the realization that most fire departments don't have the staff bandwidth to focus fully on communications. I know when I was at Marin County Fire Department, that was a constant struggle. So we hope to be able to not replace, but support the message from our local fire departments, and then to prioritize and refine our goals, or our phase 1, phase 2, and what we're going to accomplish, and make sure that they are achievable. And find a way to make sure that we actually move the needle, not with just our own projects, but getting the public to accept their responsibility to help with moving that needle.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, excellent. And may I ask a question then? Just as a body, in moving this through, us as an organization, and the focus on the member agencies and the local fire agencies, what interaction would you describe as far as working with the ATC and the ops in developing this product? What can you tell us what the game plan is, Mark?
That's part of the metrics piece, and I forgot to add that, Bruce. My apologies for what I've gathered from this conversation, and that's where ATC and ops will have a lot of input. Is after we develop, while they're going to be involved while developing the objectives, and then they will be instrumental and key in creating the metrics. Okay.
So am I correct then that Pam and team are going to kind of go back and rework this in response to the comments here, and then we'll expect something next month? Is that correct?
Well, I would, with the volume of work that we have that's in there, I would actually like to see if we can get the comments from the board, from the executive committee, built into this strategy in order to bring to the board on April 15th, so that we can actually implement that strategy. We can implement the strategy as draft if we need to, but I would you know how I am. I'm aggressive with my timelines, and so I would like to try to get that to the board on the 15th if we can.
Okay, I think that's fine, but you're proposing the package as it currently is for further questions, comments, and suggestions?
Well, no, we would actually circle up the ad hoc committee prior to the next board.
Okay, thank you. That sounds perfect. I think we're all in agreement here.
A really excellent work by the committee and by Pam and Mark.
really wonderful. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Oh, Pam, thanks.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Pam, very much.
Thank you so much. What excellent work. Well, let's move on to item number 8, which is the legislative support process. Mark, please, and Megan, you'll present a staff report to us. Thank you.
Yep, and following your committee's direction, Megan did a ton of research. I bet you guys could, when you read the staff report, you knew exactly what part Megan wrote and the tiny little piece that I wrote at the end. So, but we do need to be careful and with our funding, using our funding for legislation and lobbying. And that was the piece that Megan really looked into. And I also think we need to be careful not to put our member agencies in awkward positions where MWPA may have one stance on an item, whereas the member agencies may have a different stance. I don't think we have to avoid that type of conflict. And then we were able to find Marine Clean Energy's example of, a boilerplate items that they feel comfortable with their staff making recommendations without having to come to the board. Because sometimes you have to move quickly. And I think Assemblymember Levine's Assembly Bill 1439 is a good example that's a no-brainer that all of the member agencies are going to support. In fact, member agencies are looking to the MWPA for their recommendation on that particular Assembly bill. Senate Bill 45 is another one that it seems to be a no-brainer. So what we're really looking for is direction today from the executive committee and perhaps ongoing direction on how Megan and I can draft a policy that's similar to Marine Clean Energy's. And then that includes a process for some of the more difficult legislation ideas to follow. That would include probably the executive committee for vetting.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. So we ready for questions, comments? Or Megan, did you want to make any introductory comments now?
No, thanks. I don't want to bore you all with what I did uncover, and it was just the surface. So
there's ink on paper, so thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, so Rachel and Dennis.
So I think, yes, I totally support the idea. I like MCE's model. I think that's really very, very helpful. I'm wondering, sort of similar to the MCCMC's, help me, mayor, city council committee, that we have somebody who represents the Cal cities and brings in people who need to speak to something, so that so none of us are responsible for necessarily having to be the expert in those areas, but can bring some expertise to the table. And if there's somebody that might be able to represent that, and maybe it's Nancy Hall Bennett, or maybe it's somebody else, maybe we can consider something like that.
Are we doing questions? Or are we going to do comments after public comment? I'm just wondering when to chime in with comments versus questions.
Yeah, clarifying questions, comments, and discussion later. Rachel, so thank you. Other questions from the board? Seeing none, let's go to public comment, please.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there is no public comment.
Thank you, Allison. So back to the committee for discussion and to direct staff. So Sashi and Dennis, please.
Thank you. Great work by Megan and Mark here. I definitely think that we need to have a process. And as Mark pointed out, I think that member agencies are going to increasingly look to MWPA to provide guidance in the area of fire prevention as these things come through. And we're not going to be like MCE, where MCE actively lobbies for community choice aggregation. But I think that as bills come through, and like, as you know, there's one that I'm working on. We need to have a process to evaluate those. And I like the idea of having a category of things that can be a staff level approval. But other than that, I think we just have to make some kind of call of like, are we going to create a legislative committee that meets a couple times a year to review pending legislation, or does this go to the executive committee? I don't have a strong feeling either way. I agree with Rachel. Once we get to that point, we can get some expertise to evaluate those things. But I think I just like the idea of staff just establishing that. And I think this group could maybe decide whether we think it should be a separate committee or whether it should be this committee that evaluates that. But, I think that's the extent that we're going to do. We're not going to be doing lobbying and spending money on that. We're just going to give our stamp of yes or no on something.
Thank you, Sashi. Let's see, Dennis and then Julie, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I'm supportive of this. I think it's really important for us to have a mechanism to comment on legislation. And because of the way the state works, you have to react fairly quickly at times. The county develops a legislative policy at the beginning of every year. And then the actual, what happens is when we get a request for a letter, or we want to send a letter on behalf of one of the supervisors, it has to go through the president's office and the CAO's office. If it aligns with the legislative plan, that letter goes out under my signature or the president's signature and gets sent right away. If it doesn't align with that plan, then the only way it can happen is it has to be brought back to the board for an action item. And I think that is simple and sort of clear way to differentiate, I can't say, anyway, to figure out the differences between, if you get a lot of requests, and actually having a legislative plan is actually a relief, because if it doesn't align with that plan, it's very easy to say, we have to go to the board to get this letter sent. And most times people say, well, don't bother because you won't have time to do it. So it takes the load off the staff too. But a good legislative plan would be a way that I would like to approach this, so that staff and the board president has clear direction about what types of things they should be commenting on and not. And then if they want to comment on something that doesn't fit the plan, they could always bring it back to either the executive committee and or the board. So it works really well at the county because we can react really quickly. Like the same day, we usually can make a decision. Yes, it's in the legislative plan. Yes, we can respond to this. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's really wonderful suggestions.
And I'll reach out to Dan Eilerman to get that from the county as an example.
Okay, thank you. Julie, please.
I think we want to be clear that we're not going to be using taxpayer money for lobbying. So I'd like to have that somewhere set in stone.
Understood.
Thank you. So from my perspective, I support this entirely. Julie, your comment, I totally, it is about not spending money, but it is about informing the debate. This is what we can do. And Dennis, I really like the idea of a legislative plan, but I guess I'd like to just kind of step back for a second. We're new to this stuff. We're a new body with new organization and new leadership. I want to be clear that we should be working in partnership. There must be highly powerful, deeply engaged entities that chapter verse that probably align with our intention here. I don't want us to make anything up. What I would like us to do is to identify who, and Mark, this is for you, and Megan, who are the players that are our friends and in this endeavor, and what data can we mine from them? And if we want to stand up something a little bit different for ourselves, that's fine. But let's not make this stuff up. Let's find out who the leaders are. Let's mine their information. Let's plagiarize the heck out of them and adopt it, and not spend a lot of taxpayer dollars, hours and hours and hours of anybody's time doing new research.
The highest form of flattery, right?
Yes, indeed. Okay. Any other discussion then? I think we are supportive, some direction. Let's do this as efficiently and effectively as possible, and work on our clearly not spending money on it.
I unfortunately have to stop at 12 because I have a meeting following this. So I apologize that I'm going to miss the next two items, but I don't have any particular comments. So sorry about that, and I'll see you guys next time.
Thank you, Sashi.
Thank you.
Excellent. So let's move on to the agency partnerships and welcome Bill Keene. Mark, are you going to kick this off?
only to introduce Bill, and then I'm going to hand it off to Bill. Welcome, Bill. That's your introduction.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Mark. I'm gonna do a screen share here. Let me see if I can get this. And all right, can you all see?
Yes.
All right. So Mark mentioned that the executive committee wanted me to do a presentation in advance of the April board meeting and doing this same presentation. So this is a vetting of that and the activities that Mark and I have been undertaking sort of in these areas of leveraging the MWPA funding, building partnerships, and just general collaboration across the board. So what I'd like to cover today, CAL FIRE programs, the resource agency programs out of the state, some other opportunities and partnerships with the state, and then also some regional and local partnerships that we've been looking at. So starting with CAL FIRE programs, and there are three sort of main areas that are in the budget of CAL FIRE that relate to the work of MWPA. There's fire prevention grants. This is out of the state fire marshal's office, headed up by Steve Hawks. There's the forest health program. Julie Howard at CAL FIRE heads that up. There's a local person, Robin Bellows, who's the area forester. And then there's climate and energy programs headed up by Tim Robards. And I want to go over all three of those and then talk a little bit about in a future graphic here that I've got. We'll just show how we sort of came to a decision on what's ready for prime time right now in terms of grant funding leverage. Whoops, sorry. So fire prevention grants, these are hazard fuel reduction, wildfire prevention planning, and wildfire education. And typically these tie back to your local plan, the CWPP. There are some areas to get some prioritization with grant funding if you are tying to disadvantaged communities as well. Things like fuel reduction, vegetation management, prescribed fires, all of these are eligible. So that's the fire prevention grants. The forest health program, this is an area that Mark and I have talked about this a little bit. This is probably further out. These are large landscape scale forest lands project. And I did check with CAL FIRE folks when I was on the phone with them around whether areas that don't have commercial timber harvest, whether they're going to be eligible for that program. And the answer was yes. And forest is very liberally interpreted based on the conversation that I had. So if you see it, it's got some trees on it. They're interpreting that as that would be eligible. So you can have chaparral scrub. I think of places, up on Big Rock Ridge that are like that. Those would all be eligible. Then there's the climate energy program. And really what this is the program that's funded out of the carbon offsets that are sold at the state. In particular, I want to point out, there's sort of landscape scale projects that can get funded under this. But in addition, they have workforce development funding. And that's an area where Mark and I have been discussing, along with Jason Weber at the county, the idea of this workforce that's needed to do the veg management work. And if you can build sort of equity and diversity into that program, there's a good chance of getting some funding, not just for funding the program, but also funding the educational side of it. Moving along, at the resources agency, there's a forest management task force. I have joined that, and I had a conversation with Patrick Wright. In a sense, Patrick made introductions for me on people that I didn't know within CAL FIRE and otherwise. And he's the lead of this task force that's making recommendations to the state on how to spend wildfire funding. he was the primary author, and this task force was the primary author of that report that came out in January that laid out what the state should be prioritizing its funding for. In addition to reaching out to Patrick and starting that relationship, over the years, I've worked a lot with the Coastal Conservancy. So I did reach out to Karen Gear, who's the North Coast Program Manager for the Conservancy, as well as the chair of the board of the Conservancy, Doug Bosco. And Doug Bosco, you might remember, was the congressman from the North Coast back in I guess the late 1980s. And there was a lot of interest on what it is that MWPA will be doing, these large landscape scale areas. And there's an interest in seeing if there's a way to bring some Coastal Conservancy money, particularly for if we can build in this equity and diversity in some of the work crews. They also provide funding for actually protecting land through either easements or in fee. So there's the possibility that they might be able to help in that arena as well. And then Department of Conservation, we haven't reached out to them yet, but that's upcoming, and that's something we'll do in the coming weeks and months. And then there are some other state opportunities. I won't mention Grizzly Corps, you've already heard about that, but we're super pleased that we're getting recommended for those 2 fellows. And then at the state of California, the governor's office, there is an organization run by Kif Scheuer, who runs Cal Volunteers. Cal Volunteers may be an avenue for MWPA to get summer help. And they even have some year-long internships as well. So that's one to explore. And then there's a Climate Action Corps initiative that's being developed out of the governor's office. It's not fully baked yet, but we're going to be monitoring that and tying into that if there's an opportunity for MWPA. And then on the regional and local area, just wanted to mention County of Sonoma. I know Mark's already mentioned this, but we've had conversations with Sonoma Clean Power. That's the equivalent of Marin Clean Energy. Sonoma Water, which is the water agency that supplies wholesale water to most of Sonoma County and parts of Marin. And then also my former employer, the Ag and Open Space District, who was just nominated by the Board of Supervisors in Sonoma County to spend the $25 million in veg management money that Sonoma County has earmarked over the next several years. In terms of vegetation management and work crews, Conservation Corps North Bay, Mark and I had a call with them last week. There's a lot of interest. They see the possibility of partnering with the local junior colleges on work crews and having an education component. It's sort of an outgrowth or even building upon what they're already doing so successfully with students that are at the high school level. And then North Bay Jobs with Justice. This is an organization based in the North Bay out of Sonoma County that represents 26 labor organizations throughout the North Bay. And then we did also reach out to Cynthia Murray at the North Bay Leadership Council. In the end, when you're thinking about renewal down the road, but also in terms of building partnerships, business community is always good to get involved in. And we were definitely picking her brain on how to get the business community more involved and interested in wildfire prevention as we go forward. Couple of others, SF Public Utilities Commission. I did reach out to David Bihar. He's the climate change director, and incidentally was the executive director when I was an intern like 30 years ago at the Bay Institute. So we go way back, and he's very interested in what's happening in Marin and seeing how there might be ways to partner at the state level, particularly in areas like Senate Bill 45, and just really having that wildfire prevention. They manage a lot of watershed lands around the Bay, particularly in the South Bay. And BayCan is an organization of local government and special districts looking at climate change adaptation. And they have focused on wildfire as well in one of their symposiums, and that is of large interest to them. So that's something we're going to be monitoring. just this graphic just gives you an idea, thinking about the grant opportunities that are out there. So CAL FIRE this year, given the development of MWPA, Mark and I talked about this, the idea of what's ready. And so you can kind of look at the grant guidelines and where the MWPA is in its development. And so for this year, we're thinking that the fire prevention grants out of the State Fire Marshal's Office is our best goal and to be shooting for in this funding cycle. We did the same thing with Grizzly Corps. Is it ready for prime time? And with the bringing the planning and program manager on, it is a good time to embark on that. So that's just sort of a schematic of how we go about figuring out what to go after. And then just some future considerations. We're going to continue to develop relationships and continue to do this outreach. Relationship building, that is the key in my time, both leading an organization, but going after funding over the years. It really is a long game, and you have to nurture those relationships, build them, get people to trust what you're doing, and show wins along the way. And I think MWPA has already been doing that, and I think we'll do it through the areas we're already working on, whether it's Grizzly Corps or the grant funding with the State Fire Marshal's Office. Just a little bit about constraints. Mark is one person. There's a planning and program manager, and of course he has some help with folks like me and Charlotte and Jean Bonander, but there are resource constraints. And so we're going to be definitely mindful of that as we go forward. You talked at your last item about future legislation and lobbying support and all of that. I'm sure you'll have many more discussions about that, but certainly staying involved in legislation, particularly where there's funding involved. So Senate Bill 45 and then the companion assembly bill out of Garcia's office, those are going to be important to work to get a seat at the table. And MWPA, given its uniqueness as one of the only agencies I know of, I think probably in the state at this point, has this mandate, I think is really well positioned to have that seat at the table and talk for the wildfire prevention community. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mark.
And the only thing I was going to add is, and I have mentioned it before,
Did Mark go quiet?
Okay, good. It's not just me.
Okay, yeah.
Can you guys hear me now that I turned my video off?
Yes.
Okay. Only thing I wanted to add is specifically the CAL FIRE fire prevention grant that we're going after. We are planning on using it for DSpace, DSpace low income type grants and also home hardening type grants. And that was something that we were already planning on doing through core funding. However, if we get that grant, that'll just make more projects that we can, more money available for core projects.
Thank you. Rachel, please.
Bill, do the 3 areas of funding are they on the same funding cycle?
They seem to be, at least for the fire prevention and some of the forest health, but I didn't see where the other ones are on the same cycle. But it seems that those 2 are. They came out at the same time. Bruce might know as well. I haven't seen the workforce or the climate and energy one, but I'm guessing that one's on a different cycle.
It might be helpful when we're presenting this to the board just to include sort of a nuts and bolts around on, is it an 18-month cycle? Is it a, sort of some of that framework?
Great.
Thank you.
Board members, Julie, please.
I just have a really silly pet peeve wordsmithing change on the staff report. Sorry, Mark.
No, please.
I don't like using the word leverage because I think of, margin calls and being really in debt. So I know we're trying to leverage our resources, but maybe we want to use the word enhance or augment or something like that instead of leverage. And I noticed that's in the communications plan too, I think. And I'll send you those comments.
Thank you.
But this is great work, because basically what we're doing is, doubling our taxpayer money with everything that we get. So it's wonderful. And I think the public will really appreciate once we start receiving funds. That'll be great.
Thank you, Julie. Other comments? So I have a couple. Bill, this is really great work. One is at some point, I think we do need to acknowledge that there is a group actively working on investigating non-regulatory based interest in reducing carbon emissions. It's a voluntary market that people want to invest in good actions. And so there's an effort right now. I've been involved with it, Spatial Informatics Group, One TAM, we're in Parks and Open Space District, the federal folks. The effort is AWE, it's Avoided Wildfire Emissions. There's a protocol for private investors to reward entities for doing good management that's going to reduce emissions associated with the inevitable wildfire. So if you can, I'm happy to talk to you offline. I don't want to take time with this group, but I think we should acknowledge that there is an ongoing effort to investigate investment in avoid wildfire emissions funds that are available on the private market. So please. And then secondly, I raised this last month when we talked about grant applications. I believe, Mark, we need to hear from research that you and Bill both need to do regarding what's the organizational component of us engaging in this. Bill, you're doing great work, but we can't pay. There's grant administration work, there's fiscal work, there's administrative work, which is all going to need to be done with this. And so as we float this, Mark, I think we need to hear organizationally, what are the implications and what are we going to need to do? And we're going to have to spend some money on some staffing. It could be contract or whatever, but I can tell you grant administration takes time and money and the record keeping, et cetera, et cetera. So I really, Mark, you need to start to flesh this out for us.
Yeah, and my tentative path for that as far as funding is most grants allow for 10% for administrative costs, which is in perfect alignment with the 10% that we have of core funding. So let's pick a number out of the air. Let's say we apply for $500,000 in grants, then that should give us an additional $50,000 in administration. And I think you touched on it. I think like a temp hire could be the path that we go.
Yeah, let's just be, personnel, equipment, and supplies and contracts. Those are the line items in grants typically. And then you have to define it. And we don't have a defined rate. We don't have an overhead rate. We can't automatically, the cognizant agency has to tell us, has to recognize that. We're not free just to say 10%. We have to put it in the form of personnel, equipment, supplies, contracts, what have you. But we need to figure that out for ourselves before we get too far into. I mean, I'm fully supportive, but again, what are the implications for organization?
Understood.
Okay. Really great.
Thanks.
Other comments? Oh, should we take this to the public then?
Well, one more thing, Bruce, just I didn't mention this, but we really haven't reached out at the federal level yet. And I do have quite a bit of experience working with NRCS, and I think there's going to be some opportunities coming out of the Biden administration to leverage funding, particularly on private lands. And it's something that I think we're going to need to look into as well. Maybe partnering with the RCDs, and we just haven't gotten around to doing that yet.
Wonderful. And I do agree. The Biden administration focus on forest health, focus on climate, greenhouse gas management, those kinds of things. Yeah, let's keep your ear to the ground. And NRCS is, I think the Resource Conservation District would be a place to start. You're familiar with them. That's wonderful. Great. Okay. Public comments.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, thanks, Allison. So I guess go forth and you're ready to we'll just carry this on to the full board.
And
Yes.
we received our direction.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the input.
Thanks, everybody. Really great job, Bill and Mark and all. Let's move on to item number 10, which is the regular board meeting agenda, April 15th. So Mark, will you please present this?
Well, I think the vast majority of our conversation, and that's why we've been putting it down at the end, has led us to this. So I have no further comment. Unlike previous times, I don't have any additions I don't think we need to have on here. Except Megan, what was you were asking me a question?
I thought it might be useful just with the legislative process, rather than have the board approve that at its next meeting, have it come back to the executive committee for review and then go to the board in May. But if that slows things down too much, we can revisit that. I just thought you might be a good body to vet that before we go to the full board.
And I agree with Megan on that process, not to rush the legislative process like I'm pushing the communication strategy forward.
Okay. Oh, Mark, the only item I note is that on the consent calendar, item 6D is in dog. Will that be postponed?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I know Julie.
Yeah, sorry. Are you going to be in a position to announce your hire by the board meeting, Mark?
It'll be close.
Okay, well, maybe if that's an option, that would be great to introduce.
And what I could do is I can make a placeholder in the agenda, and if it's not there, then I can pull it out. I like that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none. Take this to the public, please, for comment. Allison?
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Allison. Back to the committee for discussion. There's no motion required here. Any further discussion? And I am seeing none. Item 11, are any informational items here to share? Seeing none. Any requests for future agenda items? And again, Mark, from my perspective, the status of ESP, the product, where it is, when you feel that it's ready. I know that there's, but yeah, if we can just keep an eye on that.
I'll continue to make that part of my executive officer report until it's time for an agenda item.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I want to thank everybody for your hard work today. Really wonderful. Everyone, thank you so much. It is 12:23 p.m. I'd like to adjourn our meeting. So thanks, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. Bye now.